Gen Xers and millennials probably remember being told that TV was going to rot their brains. It was a thing. But the concerns their parents had might seem quaint compared to what kids today are now facing. Recently, as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory that social media could present a profound risk of harm for children. Today on Blue Sky, we're talking about phones and the use of social media for kids and teens. And we aren't just talking about kids and teens. We're going to hear from them directly. Leading up to this show, our producer, Nicole Huck, worked with the grade 11 journalism class at the Regina Huda School. The class thought about their own social media use and interviewed each other about their experience.
Well, I would say that screen time works like a double-edged sword, right? Like it can be both good and bad. I would say it depends on the situation, right? It's really good with friends that are away. Connecting me with friends that are, farther in distance. But at the same time, I feel that I'm getting further away from the friends that are close to me, right? Because we're spending more and more time talking online instead of hanging out in person.
That's Ahmad Al-Mohammed, and we'll hear more from him and other students over the course of the show today. Our guest to help answer some of your questions, tough questions, I imagine, is Matthew Johnson. He's the Director of Education for Media Smarts. It's a Canadian not-for-profit centre for digital and media literacy. Hi, Matthew.
Hi.
And we also have two special guests in our Regina studio with me. Aban Iqbal and Allah Ibrahim are grade 11 students in Mr. Rogers' grade 11 journalism class at the Regina Huda School. They're going to be with us for the show today. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so let's get this discussion going. I want to start the discussion of just having prevalent cell phones around kids. Kids younger than we ever imagined. I got my first cell phone when I was 16, and I couldn't text on it. There was no T9. There was no internet browser. It was a very, very different world and a very long time ago. Aban, how many people, I shouldn't call you kids. You're not really kids anymore. How many people in your grade 11 class have a phone?
I would say probably all of them, actually.
Do you remember who the last person was to get a phone? Was that a thing?
To be honest, almost like for the past couple of years, everyone's had a phone, and I don't really remember the first person that didn't have one for a while. So,
How old were you when you got your first phone?
I was, I think, 11 or 12.
And what went into the decision and the discussion of you getting that hollowed piece of technology?
Well, I would say that my parents, they kind of just gave me my brother's old phone. There wasn't much of a discussion. Yeah, exactly. So the only real discussion I had was, don't be on this for too long. Don't give it before after 10 p.m. And then as the years progressed, there was kind of less and less of that.
Does it feel like an appendage to your body? Do you feel naked without it?
Yes, actually.
Do you have it in studio with you?
I do, right beside me.
Okay. Allah, I want to ask you the same questions. How old were you when you got your first phone?
I think I was around 10, probably, yeah.
And what kind of discussion went into that? Do you have siblings that had phones?
Oh, yeah. For my two older siblings, they definitely got it way older age than we did, and kind of because generation after generation, kids are kind of getting more used to it and want it more. So, yeah, when the discussion came, it was kind of like how Aban was saying. It was hand-me-downs. It was old iPhone 5, take that, use it, just don't use it for, improper stuff. And, yeah, that's kind of how it went.
So, did you have ongoing discussions with your parents about your phone, or was it take the phone, don't use it for bad things, and then, so what kind of conversations did you have with your parents after you got the phone?
Yeah, it was kind of they just sat me down as stuff that you should not be on. They're social media, that kind of stuff. Don't have it now, because I was still young then, right? So it's kind of use it to watch your YouTube videos. That was kind of one of the things that I used to like. But just don't go on that, because social media can show a ton of stuff to a young kid that can be bad influence to them. And I feel as though that was their main priority, making sure I don't have any of that.
Okay. Well, we do have some tape from a few of your classmates talking about why they first got a phone.
I used to beg my parents, like, even in grade 6 and in grade 7 especially, because everyone had a phone in my class in grade 7, and, like, we needed it for a lot of things, and I used to have an iPad, and just bringing that whole iPad to school was so big and stuff, and, like, I just begged my parents, and then they just got me it one day.
Oh, I was in grade 4, so I was about, like, 9, 10 years old. I remember getting it because my older sister didn't want her phone anymore. So then I asked my mom, can I have it? And then she said, fine, but I'll just take it at 8 o'clock. And then you wouldn't have it on your school, and you would only have it for like an hour or two after school.
And what were you using it for when you were 8 or 9?
To be honest, I remember reading on my phone. I also remember having Instagram. Yeah.
And did your parents monitor your Instagram?
Yeah, they were. My mom checked it every night when she took it from me. She made sure nothing was happening and that I was being saved, and that she would also like pick the books that I would read on my phone.
I was 15 when I got my phone, and it was also because like I really, really wanted it. Like I think it was from grade 6 that I wanted it, but I would not get it because my mom did not have any trust in me that I would be that responsible with the phone.
The responsibility aspect. It's not just what you see. Those pieces of technology are worth so much money. I want to bring in Matthew Johnson. As I mentioned, he's the Director of Education for Media Smarts, which is the Canadian not-for-profit Centre for Digital and Media Literacy. Matthew, you're hearing these things. What's your first impression?
You know, that is really very much what we found in our research. So we've been conducting a research project called Young Canadians in a Wireless World. Actually, for more than 20 years now, we've been going back to students across the country to find out about their experiences and their activities with digital technology. And we recently wrapped up phase 4. This is the 4th time we've collected this data. And what we did find was, first of all, the majority of young people have their own phone. When we look at our whole sample, which was from grades 4 to 11, it's about 3/4. But certainly when you look at older kids, it comes very close to 100%. The most common age to receive their first phone was from 11 to 13. About half of kids told us that. Next, around 35% said it was between 6 to 10 years old. About 15% said it was above 14, and then a very, very small number said that they had gotten their first phone at age 5 or younger. But what was really interesting to us was that in most cases, it wasn't kids who were asking for that first phone. 61% told us that they were given their first phone by their parents so they could keep in touch with them.
That's interesting. I was going to say why, I think, is the big question for me when you look at those numbers and how young. Why is it just the keeping in touch factor?
Well, that was certainly the most common reason. And it did seem to be for practical purposes, because we asked a separate question about being worried about their safety, which was significantly lower. We asked about wanting to be on a social network or wanting to play a particular kind of online game. Both of those were reasonably common, but much, much less common than wanting to keep in touch. So I think a lot of it is that people who are kids today, they're growing up in an environment that's already been shaped by the smartphone. They're growing up in an environment where we expect to be able to be in touch with people all the time. And so as our kids begin to gain more physical independence, there's an expectation that we be able to reach them.
If you have a question for Matthew, or maybe for one of our young students here weighing in on the discussion today, you can call 1-800-716-2221. That's 1-800-716-2221. We're talking about social media, mobile phones, and kids. Matthew, is there a recommended age for when parents should allow their kids to have a phone?
There isn't a single recommended age. because there are going to be a lot of different circumstances. There certainly are going to be cases, where kids have a long commute to school or live in a rural or remote area, or maybe have a lot of afternoon activities that take them around the city or place where they live, where it does make sense to give a younger kid a phone. There are going to be other circumstances where you may want to delay it if you don't feel your child is ready for it, or for whatever reason. There isn't a single time. But what is most important for parents to be aware of is that it's very, very difficult to directly supervise what kids are doing when they're on their phones. It's not the same thing as when kids are using a desktop computer or a laptop or even a tablet like an iPad. You can't just sort of walk into the room and see what they're doing. So you do want to have a feeling, unless you are going to use a phone that has limited functionality, what's sometimes now called a dumb phone. If you're going to give them a smartphone, you want to have confidence that they understand the rules that you expect them to follow, and the procedures you expect them to follow in terms of when to put the phone away and that kind of thing, and that they have absorbed the values that you want them to live by when they're using that device. And sometimes that's going to be 12, and sometimes that's going to be 14, and maybe sometimes that's going to be older. And of course, you only want to give a phone to a child that wants it. So even if it's for practical purposes, if your child doesn't want to have a phone, and there are kids that don't want phones, then think about other ways that you could be in touch with them that don't require them carrying the phone around.
I want to bring Alana Bonnie in on that part of the note. Did you guys want phones when you got them? Had you been asking for them for a while when you got your first phone?
Yeah, I guess I did. I was kind of asking for it, I guess, because I would see them using their mobile phones. And then when I was younger, once in a while, they'd give me their phones to kind of keep me busy. And I would use it. That kind of made me want my own more and more. And that's kind of how it started.
What about you, Yvonne? Was it your siblings or your friends that influenced your decision to want a phone?
For me, it was my friends, my classmates, my older brother and his friends. They got their phones. They were kind of talking about it. They were talking about the games that they would play, the apps that they would use. And I was just like, oh, that's interesting. Why can't I get my own?
And how did that argument go with your parents?
Well, of course, they weren't listening at first, but when my brother,
they weren't hearing you.
They weren't, and because that's not really a valid reason, right? But when my brother kind of he had his old phone that he didn't want anymore, kind of gave me an opportunity to argue for it, right? And I remember one of the big points that I brought up was for school, I need it for this, this, and this, when I really didn't, but...
A lot is nodding along in this. Yeah, the school argument is a strong one, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is, because you just can't go up to them and be like, oh, I want to start playing games on a phone, right? You kind of have to be smart with it. You gotta have to, bring in school and oh, I need to keep in touch with you, and that kind of stuff. Well, you do need it for school, and you do need to keep in touch, but there's other stuff behind that too.
I hear the negotiating and manipulating is a fine line in this conversation. We do have a caller on the line. Loretta's in Saskatoon, and she has some experience with her own kids. Hi, Loretta.
I had my kids are older now, past teen. But one of the discussions we had, and I'd like your guests to speak to, are the biological impacts. What I mean by that is we had discussions on, okay, first of all, I know of a number of studies where children's and youth and teens and adolescents' spines are changing from the way they hold their phones and look at the phones with their necks. That's and as well as eyesight changing from that hyper focus on something so small in front of you. The second is neurologically how the AI influence in social media changes how our kids think. So that might sound like, what does that mean? But what I've noticed a marked difference in is if there's a task or a problem to solve, I've noticed younger people need almost a gap or a moment because the automatic response is, I'm going to check Google, or I'm going to search it instead of attend to the problem in front of them. Mm-hmm. So there's it trains your brain neurologically to solve problems differently. I think expecting a mitigation from AI or from social media or from a Google search. Does this make sense?
It does, Loretta. These are great questions. Matthew, let's start with the physical impact that she was talking about with spines and necks. And I know having conversation with my own chiropractor from maybe my own social media use, that it's a thing.
Yeah, I mean, both of those are things that really affect all of us. I think that from what I've seen, the research around spinal issues is not as robust. But there's no question for any of us. The amount of time that we spend looking at screens, whether it's a phone in the palm of our hand or whether it's a laptop or a desktop screen, we have to be attentive to our spines, in the same way that people who've done repetitive actions throughout history, people working on assembly lines, monks copying scrolls in the Middle Ages, anytime you're in the same position for a long time, especially one that's putting stress on the spine, you have to attend to that. You have to make sure you stretch. You have to make sure you're not spending too much time. And it's exactly the same thing with vision. And the research there is quite a bit stronger. That there is definitely concerns around everyone's eyesight, and that it's one of the reasons why it's a really good idea to take regular breaks, whatever you're doing with screens, whether it is working on a computer, whether it's watching TV, whether it's using a phone, making sure that you are conscious of the time that's passing, making sure that you're conscious of the ways in which these platforms sometimes nudge you to spend more time using them, so that you're not just spending 2, 3, 4 hours in a row looking at a flat plane, because that is definitely very hard on our eyes.
And can you touch on the AI influence? And even, she's talking about the influence on I think of how many conversations and debates have been ruined by Google because you can't talk anymore. A conversation is over with a quick Google search. So, but when you talk about the AI influence and how people are thinking, I think that's not just a youth thing. I think that's a people thing.
Yeah, well, and I have to say, if I thought that kids and young people were solving arguments by Googling, I would actually be somewhat cheered, because what the evidence suggests, in fact, is that most of the time young people are turning to places like TikTok or places like YouTube for when they're looking for information. And partly that is because they've kind of absorbed the wrong messages, and I don't blame them for this, about digital media literacy. And I think it's partly because we don't have comprehensive digital media literacy across this country. Most teachers aren't trained in delivering it, and so young people have learned, don't trust everything you see online, which is a good thing, but they haven't learned how to determine what is trustworthy. They don't know what cues tell the difference between a source that is reliable and a source that isn't. And so what they do tend to do instead, if they haven't learned these skills, is because they can't judge accuracy, they look for authenticity. So they look for someone that they relate to, someone that they've developed a parasocial relationship with, an influencer, or someone that is like them in some way, or someone that's sending these cues of, I'm just a regular person, and they look there. But whichever way, it's not necessarily a bad thing, I think, that when we have a problem, we look for information to solve it. I think it's definitely better than, plunging in head first. But certainly there is the question of knowing how to make effective use of the sources of information available to us on the internet. So, for instance, knowing how to judge whether or not an individual Wikipedia article is reliable. And there are actually a lot of ways of doing that. Wikipedia is a tremendously valuable resource, but you need to know whether each particular article is reliable, and in some cases what people are debating on that article.
For sure. Loretta, does that answer some of your questions for Matthew?
Well, I just want to clarify. There is a marked difference between, a television screen and a computer or laptop screen and a phone. The phone, in the way we hold it and look at it, is markedly different. And just to speak to generally, responsibility is downloaded oftentimes in our system to the least resourced, and kids and youth are the least resourced when it comes to access to the education he mentioned. So, I feel a lot of compassion for the youth that you have right in your studio who are only able to access what they can access in a given moment that's really intense through this phone. And there's so much room for influence from AI, from social media that's really gunning to get the user, a youth, engaged. So I have concerns.
They are nodding along with you. Loretta, thank you so much for your call and for your thoughts.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
I do want to hear some more from the classmates of Aban and Allah. So let's hear some more of that tape.
Do you personally believe that there's a correlation between screen time and self-esteem?
Yes, 100%. And I'll give myself as an example, right? I think a lot of people, look online and they see a lot of, internet influencers. They see their lives, they see what they do, and they try to compare that. They try to compare themselves into that perfect image that is planted online. And just realize that there's really no point of comparing my, starting point with someone's end point, right? And I've realized that most of the people online, they set unrealistic standards. It's from beauty standard to bodybuilding to all that stuff. That it's not unrealistic. Most of these stuff are heavily edited, and most of the people on there, they use a lot of PEDs and body enhancement drugs, and it's just unrealistic, right?
And would you say that your mental health overall is better or worse because of social media?
Well, I would say it really depends on the time that you asked this question. If you asked me 2 years ago, I would say yes. Screen time and my mental health would be negatively affected. But now I've learned to use it in a positive way, right? Instead of comparing myself to others and online and with internet influencers to bring myself down, now I use it as a way to motivate me and use it as an incentive to become better. Even though I'm not going to be as great as some of the people online, it's just a standard to set so I can strive for and get better every day.
That was Ahmad Al-Mohammed speaking about the correlation between phone use and self-esteem. Although we know young women are often targeted with ads about body image, do the things you see online ever change the way you feel about yourself?
I guess I could say it doesn't affect me personally, but I know it affects many other people, because the way I look at it when I'm scrolling through social media, usually like Instagram or TikTok, you see women they're out there, and you start to compare yourself. You're like, oh, she has a nice face structure, nice body, and all that, and it's in your head. You're like your worst enemy, right? So it's in your head. You're rambling about, and for me personally, I know how to control that factor inside myself, so I'm not really influenced by that kind of stuff. But it can heavily influence a person's child, definitely. And I feel like it's same for men too. Men can also be influenced by many different things that are on social media, and it really affects the way that you can start thinking and start viewing the world and how you see yourself in the mirror. And that will be very negative for you in the future. The
values that are placed on people and what they see. Let's talk about filters for a second, and then I want to go to the phone because we have another caller on the line. But I want to talk about filters and self-esteem as well, because filters are have always been huge on Instagram, but now I notice the filters, particularly on TikTok, straight up make you look like a different person.
Yeah.
This question is for both of you, but is there pressure to present yourself in a certain way online?
I would say that there definitely is, like, with all of this, like, when you see other people presenting their best self and putting the picture in kind of like the most beautiful way, and it has to be perfect in order for me to post it. When you see stuff like that, and let's say you want to post your own picture, you want to make sure that you're kind of following this standard. You feel like that if you do anything less than this, if you don't put on a filter yourself, if you don't change your photo to be in this exact way, that you know that people will like it. Even if you personally don't want to do that, you feel that sort of like pressure to follow that standard, I would say.
Yeah, and also on my part, I feel as though both Instagram and Snapchat have filters that have come a long way. And it's kind of like, oh, you're about to take a picture, you and your friends, and you're just like, oh, no, I don't really like this. Let's put on a filter really quickly. Mm-hmm. And that's the picture you end up saving instead of the original because you feel as though it looks better. And you start seeing yourself in a way that I can't take a photo unless I have this filter on.
Because it won't look like you.
Yeah, because then it won't look like you, yeah. And then you just have this like image in your head that's what I have to have on every time I take a video, a photo, or post anything online.
Which is so interesting when you really think about it, because your photos are your personal history.
Yeah.
So 30 years from now, when you look back, if those are the only photos you've saved of yourself, it's actually an alternate history of the person that isn't even you. I want to go to the phone. We have Maria on the line in Swift Current. Hi, Maria.
Hi, I'm really glad you're having this conversation. You mentioned people thought that TV rotted the brain, and I would say it has rotted our brains, and you can see the negative effects as the same as the internet. It's led to senseless consumerism, this celebrity and idolization culture, which leads to decreased self-worth, the creation of social constructs that are unrealistic, and the normalization of dysfunctional behaviors and attitudes. It's a gateway to the normalization of technology and the dehumanizing of life and the breaking apart of community. And it has also led to a vast amount of destruction of our environment, and I would argue more so than the oil industry. And, I think we do have rotten brains if we are justifying our reliance on technology, giving all the harms that it is causing to people. And we are rotten in the brain if we can justify capitalism while sitting there worshiping Jesus. Like, I'm sorry, we have rotten brains. TV has rotten our brains, and the internet's rotten our brains. Okay. It's about time we refuse to use it.
Okay. Maria, thank you for your thoughts on this. Matthew, I want to bring you in on this. Particularly, I want to go back to the conversation we were having about filters and standards, because I've heard Abon and Allah both use the word standard and hitting their own personal standard. Mm-hmm. When Instagram first came out, when Facebook first came out, it wasn't so much about the standard. It was just about sharing your life. And then it became sharing your food. And then it became what it is today. And it's a business model for so many people when you think of people who literally have influencer on their business card. Mm-hmm. And influencers have a job to influence people. And in a lot of cases, young people. I'm wondering, when you look at the Surgeon General's warning, when you hear what these young people have had to say, what does it make you think of?
Well, it is important to say that we have been comparing ourselves to other people on social media since the days of Facebook. It did tend to be in those days more about comparing our lives to other people's lives, because, of course, we would tend to post only the most notable things. Mm-hmm. And so you'd be seeing the highlight reels of other people's lives while, of course, living the humdrum reality of your own life. And we do know that that had a negative effect on people's self-esteem. We also know that there were ways that you could deal with that you could mitigate that. That posting honestly yourself, not just selecting highlights, was a way of reducing that negative effect. And we see the very same thing with photos, and even with filters. One of the really interesting things about filters and Photoshop and other kinds of photo manipulation is that just knowing that an image is filtered or altered in some way doesn't change the impact of it, because most young people do know that most of these images are filtered or photoshopped. And so being aware of that isn't enough to minimize the effect. Because what actually happens is this really interesting effect in media that's called two-step flow, which is most of us believe that we're not affected by media, but we also believe that other people are affected by media. And so what we tend to think, what's going on unconsciously in our minds is, well, I don't believe this, but everyone I know believes this, so I have to act as though I believe it. And so what's really important is making people aware, especially young people, that in fact everyone else is having these same struggles, that everybody else is aware that these are filtered. Everybody else is struggling with the pressure to present an idealized image of themselves, whether that's an idealized image of yourself on Facebook, whether it's an idealized image of yourself as this, this witty, quippy person on Twitter, whether it's an idealized image of your body on Instagram, or of you as this funny person on TikTok or whatever. We're all going through this struggle. And once people understand that, and in particular, once people understand the ways that these platforms influence us to do this, and the ways in particular that they make money from our doing this, those actually start to make a difference. But we also know from our research that most young people don't have a clear idea how any of these platforms make money. And of course, it's very difficult to be any kind of conscious consumer or to even really engage with social media when you don't understand how it's making money off of you and how that influences their design and their business practices.
What's interesting as you're talking about this, I think of my own social media use as an example, and how over the years I've tried to be more honest, more authentic. And while the post might be more honest and more authentic, I still think about the picture. So even though the writing might be honest, the picture is still curated. And I'm thinking about that, looking at these students, wondering if you're able to post honestly, where even I struggle with that, where it's my concerted effort is to be more honest, and I'm still not 100% honest. Are you able to post honestly, Allah, when you post? Are you able to be yourself and not care about what that post is going to get for likes, what the picture looks like, or what the caption is? Is that something you can do?
I feel like that's not something I can 100% do, because there's always going to be that voice in the back of my head, like, oh, can you check it one more time before you post it, And it's like you're going through it, like looking over it, making sure like you look good, making sure everything's in the right place. But at the same time, there's also like the voice in my head that's saying, like, why even care, right? Like the people who are gonna see this, they're gonna see you once in their life, and they're probably gonna forget about you. Your friends, they shouldn't judge you just by the way you look or anything.
Well, they know you in real life.
Yeah.
So what you put on online and when they see you in person,
exactly.
If you look like two different people.
Yeah. So even with that factor, teens, not necessarily me, but teens still continue to do it, even with the factor that they know who I look in real life. But I will still continue to do this just because it'll make the feeling inside them at ease.
When you hear that, Aban, what does that make you think about your own social media use?
Yeah, I definitely think the same thing. A big part of me wants me to be authentic to myself, true to myself, and basically post what I like, post what I know is true. But then when it actually comes to hitting the post button, then it's but I know this will get me more likes. I know if I put on this filter, this will get me more comments, So it's I'm sacrificing that authenticity for basically more shares, more follows, more comments, and I think that I end up doing that. I end up sacrificing that authenticity in the end.
And talking with both of you before the show, neither of you want to be influencers.
No.
No.
So do the likes and the follows really matter?
I would say that they really don't matter. Like in the end, you're just gonna remember that, oh, I posted this thing. I could have posted it like exactly how it was in the moment, but I did change it for just this little more that really didn't matter in the end. When you're looking back, it won't matter. And yeah.
Okay. We have talked a lot about the negatives of social media, but you did talk to your classmates, and there are some positives to social media. Let's hear those.
My most used app is TikTok because it's the most addicting app out there, I'll admit. It's the short videos just makes it like more addicting to just scroll through. And
do you believe that teenagers' mental health has deteriorated since phones became popular?
I would say no. It wouldn't deteriorate other people's mental health or even teenagers because, yes, there are negatives to it, but there's also positive sides to it. Like, some kids find that they feel more comfortable talking to people in social media rather than talking in real life, like introverted people. And they feel like a sense of comfort knowing that they're like other people like them.
Other people like them. Do you find that on social media, that you feel like you're finding other people like you? Or if you know that the filters exist and the thought went into it, are you as alike as you think you are?
So one thing I'd like to mention is like moving a little bit away from social media. I agree with her on that one point where you can find other people like you and you can talk to some people easier. And I found that myself through like video games. Mm-hmm. I've made quite a lot of like online friends, through different video games. And I found that like, there's this like stranger like who's like thousands of miles across the earth, and I'm playing games with them, I'm connecting with them, I'm having a good time. So I think that could be one benefit. It's like you get to know these people and you get to meet new people, and you can have a great time with them.
So it's almost like I compare it to when I was younger. I make myself sound 900 years old when I say this. But when I was younger, I'm like playing on sports teams. It's in that same way that you meet a new community, you meet new people who like the same thing as you, and you become friends as a result. Your community's just much bigger because it's not necessarily local.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with him on video games, kind of. Not really like social media. I just kind of have my friends on social media, but definitely on video games, because it's you queue in, like you go in a game with like random people that are in the U.S., across the world, and it's nice. Some of the people won't be as nice, but it's nice when you meet a good person and talk about, like, you start getting into like deeper conversations, talk about their values, talk about what they like to do, and it puts a smile on your face even though you're behind a screen and you can't even see who the person is, so there's nothing to really judge.
Mm-hmm. Matthew, I want to bring you into this conversation because we are talking about positives, and we've talked a lot about negatives. We talked about the Surgeon General's warning. We talked about the things that could go wrong, but there are good things from the media smarts perspective. What would you see the best thing is that there is good?
There are a lot of different benefits. And I do want to point out that even in the Surgeon General's report, they did highlight that there are benefits, that this is not an example of something like smoking, where you can't point to any benefit from it. The reasoning behind that warning was just that they felt that there was enough evidence of risks that despite the benefits, they needed to make that warning. So when we talk about positives, there are a number of different things we talk about. So it's important to know that a lot of the research suggests that the negative or positive outcome of using any kind of screen isn't necessarily how much time we spend on it, except at very high levels. It's what we do with it. So when we're looking at social media, for instance, there's a lot of research that shows if you are using it to be genuinely social, if you're using it to interact with people in the same ways that you would interact with them if you were there with them, then it's largely going to have positive benefits. And same thing with video games. There's a huge difference between, let's say, playing a video game online and communicating with someone, a real person, so long as they're being nice and you're being nice, or playing a video game with someone else sitting on the couch next to you. There's a huge difference between those and playing a video game by yourself. That's not to say you should never play a video game by yourself, but you're getting that social benefit. Of course, we look at screen uses that are educational, where you're learning something or learning how to do something. And I will say something like YouTube, for instance, is tremendously valuable for those really practical things, like learning how to play guitar or something like that, where you can tell right away whether the person knows what they're talking about or not.
Yes, you can.
Creative uses. I mean, this for me, you know, as someone, and now I'm going to show my age, as someone, I remember being super excited to get a tape recorder when I was about 10 years old, because I could make radio plays. And that was the first time I'd ever had anything more than, you know, paper and crayons to make media with. And now today I see my younger son makes video games and stop motion animation and can post them. You know, he can share them with audiences I could only dream of. And then, of course, any media use that is active, that actually gets you outside and moving or gets you up and moving around, that's a benefit. But we also do have to think about the fact that although we have a lot of challenges that come from the fact that digital media are networked, you know, all of this that we're talking about, the reasons why social media, for instance, have a more powerful impact than, let's say, traditional advertising or magazines or movies, a lot of it is because we're expected to participate. We're expected to turn ourselves into media objects, as well as consumers. But the flip side of that is that we now have a chance to be engaged in ways that we couldn't before. When we see something, when we see, you know, a representation or something in a movie or a TV show that we feel is inappropriate, when we see an article in a newspaper that we think, you know, is unethical in some way, we can respond directly. We can be engaged citizens. We can be a part of shaping the norms and values of our online communities, and we can use these tools to be civically engaged offline as well. And what our research has found, and this echoes research that's been done around the world, is that the risks and the benefits come bundled together. That the kids who are engaging in these same pro-social activities and these same creative activities, in many cases, they're the kids who are having some of the same risky experiences. And we also know that the kids who say they derive the most benefit from social media, in many cases, they're also the same kids who say that it has the most negative effects on them. So that's why we have to complicate our conversation. It has to be about more than just cutting back time or putting it away completely. It has to be about learning to use these devices and these platforms in mindful ways, in purposeful ways, and in ways that are healthy for us.
It's interesting as you say that. It reminds me of many, many years ago, what happened in Egypt, what happened in Libya, the Arab Spring, and the overthrowing of the government. A lot of that happened because of social media use. So when you say engaging in and being a citizen, sometimes there's a power there that we forget about in other times when it seems like social media engagement can go the other way in being, you know, we look at what happened in the Capitol in the United States on January 6th, right? It can go both ways with social media. And that's with adults too, not just with young people. I want to listen to one more piece of tape because we are starting to come up against the clock, because we don't know the long-term effects of social media on kids. But we have one more piece of tape. His name is Ahmet Buzurtit, and he was asked how screens affect his overall mood.
Well, I spend, maybe up to 6 hours, 5 hours a day on my phone. And sometimes I spend that time, really late into the night. So I'm so tired when I wake up. And then my mood is I'm so drowsy. Maybe I'm irritable. And, it just affects the rest of my day. Yeah, after social media apps like TikTok and Instagram, my attention span is so low because those apps are made to have quick short bites of just like entertainment. So when anything like drags on, like in real life, my attention span just goes elsewhere and I can't focus.
And could you give an example of that, like happening in real life?
Yeah, like when like in math class, sometimes my math teacher, like it's a whole hour of learning and I just can't focus.
I see, all right. Why do you feel people, feel guilt or like they feel bad after spending a large amount of time on screens?
I think for some people, it could be that, like, if it's a person that really cares about their image on Instagram, they could care about whether they have enough likes or followers. Or if it's for another kind of person that doesn't care about that, it could be that they see people and they have these fantastic lives, but then they are just living maybe in their basement or something, and they don't have any of these extravagant stuff.
How do you feel when you compare your own life to someone's carefully curated, seemingly perfect life portrayed on social media?
I feel like when I compare myself to them, I only see like their best moments, but for me, I see like all my parts. I see my worst parts, I see my best parts, but for me, when I see them, I'm like, man, why isn't my life like this? Why can't I always have like just these high points after high points? Why is mine always so down?
And I think that's something we hear a lot. And I think that Allah and Abban talked about that earlier in the show, that someone's journey where they're at is not necessarily where you're at in your journey. I do want to go to the phone. Rhonda's on the phone in Regina. Hi, Rhonda.
Hi there. Excuse me. Yes, I came in a bit later to the program. But anyway, I want to bring up a concern that's a deep concern for me, because not just social media, but I guess just smartphones in general. Mm-hmm. I live downtown in Regina, so Cornwall Centre is a place I go, and I will see parents with children, and they are on their phone. The parents, are on their phones, on their phones, on their phones, mm-hmm. on their phones. And these little ones, or maybe even, not quite so little, are kind of staring off into the distance. And I grew up in a family, unfortunately, that paid little to no attention to me. And I know the super negative impact of that in defacing a person, robbing them of healthy development of self-worth, self-esteem, all of those kinds of things. So that's one thing that really concerns me with phone usage, and I guess computer usage in general as well. Mm-hmm. The second point I'd like to make is what I find, and of course I'm an older person, so is lack of courtesy. Where the phone is king. The phone rings and, oh, boom, I've got to pick this up whether we're in mid-sentence or not, with little or no, excuse me, do you mind if I take this call? Or excuse me, I do need to take this call. Hold that thought, we'll continue, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that really bothers me because of that aspect of my understanding is that when you are with someone and you are face-to-face in that sense, that's the priority. That's where the attention and the focus needs to be. And if something else comes along, then either you delay it to refer to it later, or you ask the person, excuse me, and then carry on with the call.
Sounds
so those
like,
are the 2 points
yes.
I wanted to bring up.
It sounds like we can remember our manners a little bit better with our phone use. I think that's a great reminder. Thanks for that, Rhonda. We are coming up on the end of the hour, and I want to give some last words here to Matthew. We don't have a lot of time left, but just maybe in a quick 30 seconds, if you could give us some final thoughts on parents who are listening and thinking, oh my gosh, I need to have a conversation when I get home tonight.
Yeah, well, we have talked about work that we did with the Canadian Pediatric Society as part of their digital health task force around what we call the 4M model of managing screen time in the home. And part of that is for young kids, very young kids, minimizing screen time. But for older kids, it really is about mediating with them. So having an ongoing conversation about their screen use and what they're doing with their phones and what they enjoy with it, and having an open door so that they can come to you when they have problems. Promoting mindful use and, modeling good behavior, because they're going to take their cues from you. If they see you're always on the phone, they're going to want the phone. So think about the messages that we are sending with our own phone use to our kids.
Matthew Johnson, the Director of Education at Media Smarts, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Aban Iqbal and Allah Ibrahim are grade 11 students in Mr. Rogers' grade 11 journalism class at Regina Huda School. Thank you to both of you and to all of your classmates for their work on this today. This has been so insightful. It's so great to hear from young people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.